Good morning and welcome. Welcome to our time together. What a joy and a gift it is to welcome this full group of people. We knew that this would be a big event, and it also felt important to us to keep it barrier-free, to make sure that anybody who wanted to be here could be here. So I'm glad that you have made your way here. I'm going to ask that if you have an empty seat next to you, that you would raise your hand and let somebody know that, yes, indeed, you can come and sit with me. So folks, if you are just making your way in, grab a cup of coffee, grab a muffin, and make your way to one of those empty seats. They are very available to you. We do have some space over here, of course, in this side room, which I hope y'all can see us. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Okay, good. They can see over there. If we do run out of space, we have this live streamed upstairs, and you can join us also following the service, following our education time in worship at 11 o'clock. As we move from getting here to being here, I'd love to center us in a time of prayer. So I invite you to join me as we pray together. Let us pray. God of grace, God of love, God of us all, gather us in from our many walks of life and remind us who we are, yours. Gather us in from our wild weeks and speak your words of calling once again. Gather us in from our crazy ambitions and tell us again of your work in the world. Gather us, the doubter in us all and the sinner in us all, the hopeful in us all and the saint in us all. Quiet our wandering minds and exchange our expectations for curiosity. Bless this time we share with one another. May our time be a balm to our hearts and an ember that lights paths of kinship, compassion, and reckless love all across the world. We pray in your name. Amen. It is an absolute delight to welcome you to Covenant this morning. My name is Grace Linval. I serve as one of the pastors here. I'm so glad that you are here, and I'm so grateful for the time that we will share together. As we gather in, I want to orient you to a little bit of how this morning will work. First, I want to direct you to what you probably almost sat on, which is an index card and a pen. That is a wonderful way to share of any questions that you might have for Father Boyle. If time allows, at the end of his presentation, you can write down a question. At any time, just lift that question up. We have greeters in these wonderful green shirts who will walk around and grab those. And as we finish our conversation, I'll be glad to moderate some of our questions and responses. So write down your questions, your curiosities, and just put them up in the air, and we'll come around and snag them from you so that we can ask those questions following our time together. Finally, after Father Boyle's presentation, he will move over to our plaza out there. We'll have some coffee and snacks, and he'll be signing 3 books: Cherished Belonging, Barking to the Choir, and Tattoos on the Heart. I know that we have a few tear-soaked copies of Tattoos on the Heart in the congregation, and you don't have to purchase one of them. You can use one of those that has been cherished and beloved to you, and he'd be glad to sign that. And following book signing, he will move into our 11 o'clock worship space where he will be preaching. So we invite every single one of you to join us at 11 o'clock for worship and to hear Father Boyle preach. It is my joy and my pleasure to welcome Father Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries, a Jesuit priest, former pastor of Dolores Mission, and author of several books, including Cherished Belonging, Barking to the Choir, and Tattoos on the Heart. His ministry has shaped so many of us here through our kinship program, through People in Mission, through book clubs and book studies, and I am grateful for the shaping that our congregation and our community has had, and I look forward to the ways that we will continue to be shaped and to share this message as we learn from Father Boyle. Will you join me in welcoming him?
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here. They have a clock back there, so I don't have to take my watch off. So I guess I'm a little bit intimidated because I had a lot of folks coming up and say, oh, I've heard all your YouTubes and God knows what else and podcasts and different things. So that's always kind of daunting. Once I spoke at a Orange County foster grandparent gathering. It was huge, hundreds and hundreds of people one summer. And then I was invited to speak at the same gathering the next summer, and I thought, gosh, why would you invite me 2 summers in a row? But anyway, I said yes, because I'm allergic to saying no. So, and after the second talk, that second summer, a foster grandmother came up to me, and I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands, and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. So, kind of hoping she misspoke there, but not entirely sure. Well, there's a kind of a vision that brings you here to this place, and it's a vision about how we want to see things, and formed and nurtured by the sense of the God we actually have. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But, we don't want to wait, con los brazos cruzados. We want to make something happen. And so I always think a gathering like this is a little bit like, reminds me of Martin Luther King, who we will celebrate on the 19th of January. And what he used to say about church, he says, it's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And so likewise, our gathering here this morning, it's not the place you've come to. It really will be the place that you will eventually leave from. And you will go from here, and we will together try to imagine something different. We'll try to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We will go from here and we will roll up our sleeves so that we can dismantle the barriers that exclude. We will go from here and stand at the margins as we are always invited to by the gospel, because we know that they will never get erased unless we stand out at them. And we stand with a particularity. We stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And we stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And then, wow, what a privilege. We get to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And that's the vision. And we will go from here, and we will, of course, brace ourselves, because the world will accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, for in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And because you will go from here, other voices will get heard. And I think none of that makes any sense, unless it's anchored in a vision of God that's spacious and expansive. Because the truth of all of us as human beings is we've settled for something partial. We should hold out for the actual God we have. I'm a Jesuit, and so, St. Ignatius of Loyola used to talk about the God who's always greater. And he used to say that because if you thought you had landed on some notion, and he goes, that's a great notion. And it's always greater than that notion. So it's a way of saying, don't settle for something partial, but we're human beings, so we do the best we can, Meister Eckhart, who was a theologian and a mystic, used to say, it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. We kind of don't believe that, at least in part. We think, no, there's probably more to it. Like, shouldn't there be the wagging of fingers and the expression of disappointment in us? But we project onto God the kind of God we think we ought to have, and that's a problem. Annie Lamott always says, you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do, and so we kind of want to avoid that, I think, And so it's true enough that we're created in the image and likeness of God, but it's equally true that our image of God creates us. It's the thing that will propel us from this place. And so we want to make sure it's expansive. And we want to kind of funnel out the stuff that's not that helpful. Mirabai Starr, who I recommend, she's a mystic and a translator of mystics. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods, which I think is the task of adults, probably. So for 40 years, I've been walking with gang members, 38 of those years with Homeboy Industries. And, so I celebrate Mass, Catholic services in all these detention facilities, jails, juvenile halls, probation camps, and I'm not doing it this Sunday because I'm here privileged to be with you all, but I was at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and it was a big gym, and there were like 300 gang members attending Mass, all male. And I had my album, my stole on, and I was sitting off to the side on a little raised platform, a little bit like this. And then there was the podium where the homies would come up and do the readings. And these little sheets they'd hand out would have the readings in English and in Spanish so you could follow along whatever you're comfortable with. And so I had that, and I kind of left it on my lap. I didn't want to follow it. I wanted to close my eyes and hear the word proclaimed. And the first guy got up and read from the Hebrew Bible, and the second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And I don't know, there was like an overabundance of confidence in his voice. And he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I got the sheet, I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because the exalted God is the God we would all choose to be if we were given the option to be God. But the exhausted God more captures kind of where you are, Like somebody sees you on a Monday and how was your weekend? You go, "Oh my God, I'm pooped. We had the grandkids over and, I'm exhausted." But it's a good tired. People know what that is. It's an extension of yourself for others. It's about what it looks like when you've discovered the truth of who you are, that loving is your truth, and that loving is your home. And once you know that loving is your home, you discover that you're absolutely never homesick. And that's the exhausted God that we kind of want to connect to. So I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers. And we, since COVID, we never did this before, but, we get together once a month on Zoom. And it wasn't that long ago that we gathered, and it was my mom's birthday, and she would have been 100 years old. But she died about 8 years ago or so at 92. And And she died the way all of us want to die, in our own home, in our own bed, surrounded by our kids. And she was sharp as a nail to the very end. In fact, the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. My father had died 30 years ago. And she was there alone living in this place. But she just wasn't afraid of dying. In fact, a month before she died, she was just positively giddy and sort of exhilarated. And she said, "I've never done this before," which is something you say just before skydiving. And in fact, the day before she died, I was sitting at the foot of her bed, which was, I was all alone, which absolutely never happened, where there was only one person in the room with her. And there I was, and she was sleeping, and she woke up and she saw me sitting there. And she said, "Oh, for crying out loud." And she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed that she hadn't died yet, and sorry. And then the next day, again, I was there. It was around noon, and I think my sisters had gone out to fetch lunch or something. And it was just the two of us. And at exactly 12, she opened her eyes, and she lifted her head away from the pillow, and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp. Skydiving. And she left us. And nobody in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. And I remember during her last days, she'd be in and out of consciousness, and there'd be, 3 or 8 of her kids and grandkids around her bed. And every time she came to, she would lock on to just one. And she would look at this one person, and she'd say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And I thought of that after, when I was burying her, I thought, that may well be the singular agenda item of our exhausted God, is to look at you with breathless delight and say, "You're here. You're here." That's it. In fact, we have this notion of Jesus in the garden, and it's so laden with all these images of grumbling stomach and dark night of the soul, maybe, and doubt and agony, and it's 40 days and 40 nights, which was the precursor of our Lent, and I'm kind of like Pavlov's dog. If I say the word Lent, I have to tell you briefly about Michelle Nunez, who was a homegirl tough cookie who worked at Homeboy Industries. And one day she came into my office. She said, "Well, it's official. I just found out my man's been cheating on me." I said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." "I don't sweat it. I just went to church, got me them ashes, gave his ass up for Lent." Now, I realize that it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I can't say the word Lent without telling you about Michelle. But there's Jesus in the garden, not the garden, but in the desert, and he's having this experience. And I suspect the entire thing was God looking at Jesus and saying with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And so the invitation is simple. It's we receive the tender glance so that we can be that tender glance in the world. We notice the notice of God so that we can choose and become the notice of God in the world. We can go to the margins, and we want to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, and kind. And that's the whole thing. Because once you know that loving is your home, you can do no other. than to communicate that with the clarity of your lives. So, Homeboy Industries was born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in Los Angeles, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other in my tiny little parish, which was not typical of public housing to have that many gangs. The LAPD called my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. In LA County, we have 120,000 gang members and 1,100 gangs. So if LA was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And 3 months ago, I buried my 263rd. Not all from that community, of course. But I know a lot of gang members, so I get asked. So we did things. First thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had gotten the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on walls, they were selling drugs, they were violent, and they were young. And so I remember walking out to a group of them, and I'd kind of isolate them, corner them a little bit and say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand a little bit. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, Dolores Mission Elementary, and grades K to 8 occupied the first 2 floors of this huge concrete block building. Well, the entire 3rd floor was the convent. And so one night I gathered all the nuns in the living room. I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they went, sure. And that was the entirety of their discernment process. And we were off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the church property, which created kind of a disconnect for parishioners. Parishioners would kind of sidle up to me and they'd say, hey, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out, which was a good, gospel challenge. And it was a tough school. Teachers didn't last. I remember once we had at least three big brawls every day. So I was always running across the street from the rectory to the school. We had a principal who lasted exactly one day. I remember I called him to find out where the hell he was, and he had changed his number and had apparently checked into a witness protection program. But the kids came, that was the thing. They came from all 8 gangs, and even though they hated each other, or so they thought. And then in no time they said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, and of course the profile in the housing projects are women with children. There weren't a lot of men. Myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. And so we just had to start stuff, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to paint out graffiti, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of members of the rival 8 gangs. And then in 1992, on the very last day of April, the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King were acquitted. And every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles just ignited, except the poorest pocket, my parish. It just didn't. And the LA Times came the next day wanting to know, why that might be. And I said, well, I'm not entirely sure, but, we did have 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. And so the next day the article appeared, and the following day I was summoned to the Beverly Hills office of a movie producer named Ray Stark, who produced Funny Girl and a lot of other movies. And he happened to have $500 million. And so he said, how should I spend my money? That was his first question to me. And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. I was young, I had hair. And I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it. It has ovens, they don't work, but you could fix them. We could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members. They could, suppose bake bread. And then we could call it, Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. So then we were off and running. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future, which was what we had called ourselves, to Homeboy Industries. And so now, all these many years later, we never intended to do any of this, really didn't. It's just evolved. We backed our way into becoming now the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet Earth. We didn't intend to do that, but it happened. So 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors. I don't suspect there's a single gang member in Los Angeles County who doesn't know where we are and what we do. But they have to freely walk through the door. And everyone who walks through those doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. I think we've discovered at Homeboy that tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity because it allows for some connective tissue between human beings. It's never about, service provider, service recipient. It's about exquisite mutuality. And every single man or woman walks through those doors at Homeboy freely. They come with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't really calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so they walk through the doors and they experience the place as safe. And then they're seen. And then they can be cherished. A lot of the folks who have spent 30, 40 years in prison walk through our doors. And they always say, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so everybody there, not just a select few, every single person welcomes folks when they walk through the door because they know how monumental it is. And when they walk through the door, they look them in the eye and their whole being seems to say, you're here. You're here. So that people can heal. If it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. I'll take a little detour here. So, I mentioned I'm a Jesuit, like Pope Francis. I'm just saying. But the homies don't really know what a Jesuit is, you know. It's so even though we have three of us who work there, and always have had three probably for most of our existence. So my office, if you've ever been there, I'm glass enclosed, you know, so I can look out and see the whole floor of the reception area at Homeboy. And I can see people coming in through the front door, and then there's the well, which is a big reception desk, and people sign in, and I can see everything. And we have 8 tour groups a day from all over the world, all over the country, large and small. And so I'm there sitting behind my desk, and I have 2 homies in front of the desk, and a big tour group just plants itself, like 20 people, right in front of my glass enclosed office, you know, and I wave faintly, and it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat kinds of moments. And the guy leading the tour is Osvaldo, and everybody would tell you there that Osvaldo has a loud ass voice, you know, and this is Father Greg Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest. So from my desk, I kind of demonstrate some of my more impressive moves, you know. Well, anyway, I told you that to tell you this. On February 28 of 1540, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, enters for the first time this word in his diary or his spiritual journal. He proceeds to use the word quite a bit for the remainder of his 12 years on this earth. Before he died, he went back, he circled the word for all the times he had used it. And I know Spanish, but I had never heard this word before. And the word is acatamiento. Acatamiento. And it comes from an archaic word in Spanish, acatar, which means to look at something with attention. And it gets translated as affectionate awe. And I, you know, certainly was born of a private, singular relationship between Ignatius and that God we actually have. But I suspect he wanted it to be something broader, like perhaps even a disposition at the margins. So if we ask ourselves, what ought our stance to be at the margins? I think Ignatius would say acatamiento, affectionate awe, which harkens to a line in the Acts of the Apostles where it says simply, and awe came upon everyone. And it suggests that the measure of the health of any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. Well, many years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And in those days, we used to have this thing called a gang in service. And I went to a lot of them throughout the country during the decade of death, which was 88 to 98 primarily, where a lot of major cities had issues with gang violence. And so, 600 social workers would commandeer a hotel ballroom, and they'd sign in, and get credits for it. And they'd have keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions. And I'd done lots of these. And it was a way for people to social workers in particular, but helping community, to learn, what do we do? How do we handle this? How should we see it? And to discover, I think, that gang violence has always been a lethal absence of hope. And no kid is joining a gang because he's seeking something. He's always fleeing something. There are no exceptions to that. And how do we infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign? And how do we help heal the traumatized so that kids can transform their pain so that they don't have to transmit it anymore? And how do we deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way? Things like that. So I'd done a lot of these. I figured I was going to give a keynote. So I bought my ticket to Richmond, Virginia. Well, this happens to me all the time. You know, like a week before I am to fly, I pull out the letter that invited me. What is this thing again? Then I discovered, to my horror, that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And as the homies would say, I said to myself, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I got two homies. So we have an 18-month program, you know. So I got two homies, Andre, an African-American gang member, and his enemy, Jose. And they're in their 18 months. They're like in their 9th month of their 18-month program with us. And I sit them down in my office. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I would like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old at the time, and he just texted me this morning, as early as this is there. And he, you know, was in prison. He was a shot caller from his gang, tattooed felon. We have all these things at Homeboy, you know, so we have 14 social enterprises, from dog grooming to electronic recycling. We have tattoo removal, therapy, you know, substance use disorder. And that was he kind of glommed onto that team because he was a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only was he prisoner, gang member, shot caller, felon, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and tells his story. I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And then they did what you just did, and we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. But then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage. And she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. And so this talk is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to take seriously the things that Jesus took seriously. And there are only 4, fortunately for us. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And we go from here and we embrace those things because they are the marrow of the gospel. Let me just finish one last story and then we'll have questions. It occurs sometimes, mainly in jiu-jitsu universities, to force their students to read my books against their will. I'm not complaining, but so Gonzaga University in Spokane, who every year in March ruins my bracket, they had forced the incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart, and they said, would you come and speak, and could you bring 2 homies? And I do when people ask, and I have a longer stretch in town, and I always pick homies in the same way. I always pick enemies, rivals, just to force them to share a hotel room, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of watching gang members panicked in the sky. I remember once I was at LAX with 2 older guys, and one of them says, hey, G, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yeah, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. Okay, so I picked a Larry, African-American gang member, and his enemy, Mario. And I'm used to picking homies who are, nervous Nellies in the sky. But this guy, Mario, it was unbelievable. I've never experienced anything like it. He was just so terrified. It was starting to freak me out a little bit. Like he was hyperventilating, which I had never witnessed. And anyway, and we hadn't even, boarded the plane yet. And so we were at Burbank Airport, which is, if you've ever been there, it's small-ish, but it's big Southwest Airlines planes. So it's, big planes, regular planes, but you don't go through that hermetically sealed chute. You walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the steps that board the front of the plane. Big feature at Burbank, steps to board the back of the plane. I've never seen that before, but they have it there. And I'm sitting there with Mario, and Larry is exploring the Burbank airport. And it's early morning. It's the first flight of the day, still not fully light yet. And I see, our flight crew arrives, and there are 2 female flight attendants, both of them with very large cups of Starbucks coffee. And they're schlepping up the steps to board the plane. And just then, Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have actually said that to him, but I should tell you that Mario, in our 38-year history, is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there, which is really saying something. He's all sleeved out to his fingertips with tattoos, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say "the end," so that apparently when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt for anybody, I guess. And so I'd never been in public with him, and so I'm walking him through the airport to kind of calm him down, and people are, oh my God, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. I'm going, wow, isn't that something? Because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and walk in and say, quick, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here? They will take exactly one beat, and then they'd say, Mario. Yeah, Mario. Mario was proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. Mario is proof that the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. So we get to Gonzaga, and what they don't tell you is it's a big Tuesday night venue, 1,000 people. But before we get to that venue, they would like you to speak to like 93 classrooms. I was like, oh my God. So I said, you guys get up, tell your stories, practice. I'll sit in the back of the classroom. And they did. They did a good job. Mario was terrified, but stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So we get up in front of 1,000 people in this big venue, and the two of them get up and tell their stories as they had in the classrooms and did a good job. Mario was nervous. I got up and did my thing, as I just have. And then I invited them to come up during the question and answer period. And even though it was 1,000 people, I raise your hand, and yes, ma'am. And a woman stands and she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate, And Mario's a tall, skinny drink of water, and he's very nervous. And he clutches the microphone and he says, yes. And she goes, well, Mario, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone with even greater intensity, and he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone, clutching closed-eyed refuge. And now I know he's losing this battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face over his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And let there be no doubt that everybody standing and clapping had been returned to themselves, exquisitely mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. You'll go from here and you will imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside of it. You will go from here and you will dismantle the barriers that exclude. And my sense of this community already is that you gave up a long time ago caring if anybody might accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you very much.
Father Boyle, thank you so much for sharing your story and the homies' stories and being here with us. We do have a few questions that I'd love to share with you. As you were sharing the story of Mario, I was reminded of Ram Dass's quote, "We're all just walking each other home." And I thank you for helping to walk each of us home this morning. Thank you for that. We've had... We've had a few questions come in, and as I've walked around, I've also seen a few people clutching onto their note cards. When I asked if they were a question, they said, "No, it's a note, don't take it." So if you are willing to give up your note card and ask a question, you can go ahead. We've got some folks walking around, and the ones that I've ripped out of people's hands, I'll ask now. First, one question that came up is earlier in your talk, you talked about never having really intended to do any of this, in the sense of you didn't intend to create a bakery and start Homeboy Industries. Can you share a little bit about what your intention is when you wake up in the morning? And then also, how do you overcome your own intentions or ambitions?
In my own intentions and what? Ambitions?
Ambitions.
Oh, I don't really have ambitions. I don't have intentions. I just, part of the thing is when you're in a parish, you're responding. I don't think it ever, and I think that's the way it should be, because you're listening, what's going on. And sometimes, like I know that we were listening to gang members when they said, if only we had jobs. So we tried to find felony-friendly employers. But that's because we were listening to gang members. Once we knew gang members, everything changed. So I'd say 15 years in, our motto had been, nothing stops a bullet like a job. That we moved to go, no, it's not about jobs. It's about healing. Because we realized that an educated gang member may or may not return to prison. And an employed one may or may not. But then it became our contention that a healed gang member will not reoffend, period. So it was all about healing. Even I've added to Ram Dass, because it's, let's walk each other home to what? I always say to health. Because, you've never met a holy person who wasn't a healthy person. You've never met a healthy person who wasn't a holy person. You just haven't. So when we lament, oh my God, there's just a sense of decency is out the window and a moral compass, and healthy people are moral people. They just are. Always have been. And since, I was at this LA Times Festival of Books, and I was in a panel with a rabbi and a columnist from the LA Times and myself. And I don't know what we were talking about, but I said, at Homeboy, we embrace two principles. One, everyone is unshakably good. There are no exceptions. And two, we belong to each other, and there are no exceptions. Then I kind of said, maybe rhetorically, now, do I think every single complex, vexing social dilemma we need to address would disappear if we embrace those two principles? And I said, yes, I do. And the entire packed auditorium burst into laughter. And I have to admit, I was startled. And when it subsided, I said, yes, I do. So how do we walk each other home to health? It's not good people or bad people. It's not about becoming good. You're already unshakably good. You may not know this, and maybe your access to knowledge of that has been compromised by your addiction or by your trauma or by, being a malignant narcissist or a sociopath. And I don't mention those as bad things. Nobody chooses to be that. I had 2 nephews who took their own lives, and they didn't choose the anguish that plagued them since they were children. It chose them. I don't know how to explain that. But it didn't touch their goodness. So I think it's important to kind of reframe it a little bit. I know Vivek Murthy, see what happens if you ask me one question I launch, but Vivek Murthy, as he left as Surgeon General, he said, mental health is the defining health issue of our time. And if you look around, I have to say, anecdotally, in 40 years of working with gang members, mental health is the defining health issue of our time. Did it used to be? No. But you have social media, you have isolation, you have not as many avenues for community, you have COVID. All these things were exacerbators of this anguish. And so we always think, it's a divided country, and people believe this and people believe that. No, we share a common anguish. And perhaps we could choose to walk each other home to health. So anyway, that's getting back to the question, was, that you're just responding to what's right in front of you. When it was clear that nobody would hire people covered in tattoos, we got tattoo machines. And now, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, and 43 volunteer doctors. And we have a waiting list of 1,000. So, and no place on the planet removes more tattoos. So it's just a thing that we respond to something that presents itself. And I think that's important, because if you're listening and if you're knowing and if you're engaging and if you're desirous of relational wholeness, then you'll kind of know what to do. But I have no intention, ambition. I have a light grasp on all that stuff. I don't really care about any of that stuff.
Thank you. I'm going to let you make your way outside with Mandy to sign some books, and we'll grab you some more water too if you'd like. Father Boyle is going to make his way. Thank you. I'll see you in a little bit. Yeah, she's got you. Father Boyle's headed outside to sign some books, and you're stuck with me for just another 30 seconds so that I can share with you what's next for the morning and close us in prayer. I invite you, following our prayer, to head outside, and you can buy one of his books and have an opportunity to sign that. We'll pull him away a little before 11 o'clock so he can head into worship where he'll be preaching, and then he will join us once again for book signing and book selling in our Welcome Center next to our sanctuary. So we strongly encourage you to get some time to talk with him and to learn more from him, and then also to take these books home, to share them with somebody, gift them to somebody, tell somebody about the goodness that you heard and you felt this morning. As we transition out of here, I'd love to close us in a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for calling us good. We give you thanks for speaking those words to us once again. And we pray you would send us from this place, seeing the goodness within ourselves, and by seeing that, able to see the goodness that you have placed in each and every person across this world. We pray in your name. Amen. Thank you.